Oh my goodness. Sorry, I just punched my mic stand. All right.
Haymakers.
Howdy, folks. I'm Mark, and today I am joined by Landry Smith. Landry, thanks for joining me for this short talk about video games.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
Well, absolutely. You are listening to Quick Play, so we can get right into it. Well, Landry, you've got something that you've been mulling on about game reviews and reviewers. Why don't you just take it from here? Like, what's on your mind? Get it off your chest.
Yeah, Mark, I have been thinking,
Yeah.
and I really believe that video game reviews are in a bad state right now. And I think that's a bad thing for video games overall. There aren't many video game critics right now that I'm just like dying to read or think are offering really anything to the medium as a whole. And I believe the industry is starving for its own Roger Ebert. Are you familiar with Roger Ebert at all?
Yes, I haven't really read much of him, but I know his work and the kind of what he's about.
Okay.
There's one tangent. There's also a song by Clem Snide, I think, called Roger Ebert. That's produced by Scott Avett. It's a great song. I like that.
Okay. I will have to check that out for sure.
Nice.
I love Roger Ebert. He's probably the most famous mainstream movie critic, but he was a champion for the history of movies as well. He had a TV show with his partner Siskel where they would review mainstream Hollywood films, but the way he incorporated the history of cinema into his own writing was extremely eye-opening to me as a young cinema buff and movie buff. And really what I think stuck out to me was in the 90s, he began writing a bi-weekly column on classic films. Okay. And this would be on movies that I had never heard of, like The Third Man, 8.5, and The Seven Samurai, foreign cinema, and then old American movies that were a little more obscure than your, Citizen Kane's or Wizard of Oz, the things that held a main cultural stance.
Yeah.
But this was a time, I was a little kid then, and I wasn't necessarily reading those then. I was probably more the early 2000s is when I started reading. I was in high school and started reading a lot of this content. But this was a time when he was writing for the Chicago Sun-Times, and American film journalism was all about celebrity news and big box office results, as you might imagine. So it was pretty edgy that his editors were allowing him to write these longer analytical essays on classic film, and especially somebody who had that huge platform, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's what I've been thinking a lot about is just how can video games really need not necessarily just a reviewer, right, who's telling people what to buy, but an actual critic who is willing to harshly criticize some of the things wrong with the industry so that, game creators can make some better content and, push the envelope a little more.
Okay. I feel like the main thing I knew about Roger Ebert is which also I had no idea about his kind of classic film stuff in the column there. I feel like he was known for being just a really harsh critic. Is there when you think about when it comes to reviewing video games, is that kind of the thrust of it is we need to be harsher, or is there more depth there?
Well, he was a harsh critic against entertainment for entertainment's sake and just bloated Hollywood kind of copy and paste films, stuff that came out of the formulaic, this is going to be successful, this is going to be a big blockbuster hit. Even though it might be a lot of fun, this might not be a great movie experience, right? Overall, when you're thinking about the history of film and, something that's really got substantial weight, or to use that mysterious word, something that's actual art, as opposed to just an entertainment property. So he was a harsh critic in that way, and I think that's exactly what video games need. First of all, video games need a new name overall. The title video game doesn't necessarily encompass what video games are, right? Like a
Yeah.
lot of video games are not really like, oh, you have to complete this challenge to move on. You know, a lot of them are
Yeah.
more like narrative experiences where, yeah, there's a little gamified like parts to them, but like no matter what, you can put things on easy mode. You can get through, right?
Yeah.
Like the main point is to like experience some kind of narrative.
Yeah. Also, like, way to bury the lead and kind of the whole deeper topic of video games need a new name.
Oh yeah, sorry.
That's fine.
Maybe that's another topic.
I just threw me for a loop. Yeah.
For
But
another day.
keep going. Tell me more. What were you thinking?
But yeah, no, I'm just saying, like, I really am. I think this industry is starved for somebody who can be just extremely harsh against some of the things these big corporations are doing. And, you know, it's a tough environment out there, right? Because a lot of these corporations and developers are like, some of them like have goals for their development teams to hit. Like, you need to hit this Metacritic score or this Open Critic score. And if you do, then you'll get a bonus, or you'll hit like, you know, I don't know exactly how all their contracts are structured, but like that being in there I'm sure it has a lot of weight on games reviewers, but I just don't know that there are a lot of critics out there that are, and I'm not saying that necessarily affects them, you know, consciously, but I think it would be a tough job to be a video game critic in this environment. And I'm not saying you should just start slinging out 2 stars to every single video game that comes along, but like, let's face it, like there's a lot of, you know, video games like franchises like Call of Duty and Assassin's Creed, and I've loved games in those series, don't get me wrong, but that come out every single year, or like Madden, like something that's very close to me that I actually do play just about every year. Like, there needs to be, like, there's no reason those games should be getting 70s and 80s every single year, right? Like there's
because they
some
copy
serious
and paste.
problems.
The last one was 70, so this one gets 70 as well.
Exactly. So like there's just like, there needs to be something. I think something needs to be addressed with certain things.
Sure. Do you feel like there's anyone in your mind who's kind of doing that or getting close to it?
I do think that there's one critic out there that I like to read who I think is pretty close. So I'm going to start kind of jumping into this by like, I want to detail out why I think Roger Ebert was so good at what he did.
Yes.
Right. Like there are 3 things that really stick out to me, like with his writing style, that like make him head and shoulders above any movie critics that I've read personally. And one is that he had the power or sway to actually meet people in the industry and have like these firsthand experiences with big directors, big actors, and like cinematographers, editors, you name it. You know, like he was there with them, talking with them, interviewing them, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So he can bring those into his reviews and interviews, right? And you might say like, oh, that could affect maybe the scores he's putting out there. But I think if you read his body of work, that you would see that like, I don't know that it necessarily did. He's pretty harsh in a lot of different ways. And I'm sure that could curb in some ways, but
as you're saying that too, it kind of like made me question of like, did all these people like Roger Ebert, or like were they wary of him because he was so harsh?
I think people in like who had made some of the older movies definitely looked up to him, and I guess that's where a lot of like the things that I've seen him talk about are people who made a lot of these older movies, you know, that he would have been praising and stuff. So I'm sure he had his enemies. I know that a lot of people who are video gamers, that's
he has. So that's another thing I know about him. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, he definitely does not. He did not think. You know, he passed away a long time ago. He did not think that video games were art, and I think he was like, with his argument, he was right. But I don't think his argument like necessarily would hold up today.
Sure.
But the second thing that so the first thing, he had a lot of connections in the industry, so he could bring some of those experiences into his writing. The second thing, he connected his essays, his reviews, his criticism to cinema's past, like to the history of cinema, and he knew it extremely well, right? So he knew the classics. He knew when something was riffing on something else, or when something was, you know, maybe using like a different shot that was kind of calling back to another scene or something from a lot of classic cinema, and he knew it like the back of his hand. And then thirdly, he was a really excellent creative writer. Like, his essays, when you read them on film, hold up just as like something fun to read. And
Hmm.
a lot of video game reviews, if you're talking about like IGN, like I'm a huge IGN fan, so that's
Sure.
why I talk
Yeah.
about it a lot. That's like my video game website.
Yeah.
I listen to Nintendo Voice Chat every single week and Game Scoop,
Yeah.
but a lot of their reviews, and I think Tom Marks and Dan Stapleton do a great job for what they're doing. But and this is probably not even their decision, but they're formulaic as hell. Like a lot of their reviews are so formulaic, you can almost like I guarantee you, I don't think I've ever seen your writing, but like you could just look at like what they're looking for a review, and you could write one. I could
Sure.
write one. Jay could write one. Like it seems like it's just like here's what you need to hit and how you need to hit it. You know, like they're very formulaic. They don't give a lot of opportunity for creative writing.
Yeah.
But anyway, those are the three things that I think are really important. And somebody I think that's actually doing a lot of those things in the industry is Gene Park from the Washington Post.
Okay. Yeah.
Have you read any of his stuff?
I follow him on Twitter. Most recently, I read his kind of review of Stellar Blade that like delved into like Korean culture and beauty standards within Korean culture, and it kind of like it gave an actual like helpful layer to all the discourse around that game.
Cool.
That was kind of discouraging still in a way of like the objectification of women within that culture, but also like anyway, it's fascinating. So just to acknowledge like like he's a great writer and like his writing's really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I read like a lot of excerpts from Tears of the Kingdom reviews earlier today because I was like, man, I want to see like how he holds up. And I'm not going to read any of the bad ones because I don't want to like crap on anybody or anything like that. But like I just want to give like an example of how he's willing to point to like past historical moments in video games, but also like his creative writing is so good as well.
Yeah.
This is what he said about Tears of the Kingdom. Tears of the Kingdom is a miracle of engineering and elegant artifice, especially because it runs on aging, decade-old technology inside the Nintendo Switch. It unlocks parts of your creativity, forcing you to use elementary knowledge of physics and chemistry to overcome challenges. Minecraft revolutionized gaming by introducing deep creative elements, but Tears combines them with the luxurious animations and polish of a complex narrative adventure. So, in my opinion, he's doing a lot of things with language that are just like head and shoulders above his peers. He's not formulaic at all. Like you mentioned in the Stellar Blade post, like diving into like Korean culture and stuff. And then I read the Shadows of Erdtree review as well. And he's willing to talk about his own player experience in the game, like how he like got to level 713 in Elden Ring, and like, you know, how much that game meant to him. But he's also willing to talk about like Miyazaki personally, like, and this is what he says about like just kind of bringing cool little tidbits in about other directors and stuff. He says it's compelling, but only, this is about Shadows of Erdtree, but only if you're able, in the Shadows of Erdtree narrative specifically, it's compelling, but only if you're able to find it. Miyazaki deliberately tells his stories through gameplay and a patchwork of information fed to the audience in fragmented thoughts and ideas. It's inspired by his early years of trying to read fantasy books like The Lord of the Rings with a limited grasp of English, which only made the stories seem more fascinating and mysterious to him. So he, in my opinion, is bringing in like he's a good reviewer. He's doing what like consumers want, right? Like, am I going to know whether this is a product I should buy? But he's also pushing forward the medium of writing about games, which in a creative way. Yeah. But he also like highlights gaming experiences, I think, because he works for the Washington Post. You know, he's not writing about everything, but he's highlighting these games that are like really big and pivotal moments in gaming. And you know, the one thing that he doesn't get the chance to write about is like the history of games, and hearing him talk on different podcasts and stuff, he knows his stuff. So, but all that to say, you know, I don't know that necessarily Gene Park is the Ebert of video games that we need. I just think that like when I'm reading video game critics, like he's the one that I can stomach. Like a lot of the other ones, and like I love people on IGN's website like Seth Macy and Logan Plant and Red Valentine. But like when I read their reviews, it literally feels like their opinions are being watered down because their writing is not bad. It's not bad writing. It's just formulaic and cliched.
And like, to be totally honest, I don't actually read the reviews on IGN that much. Like I listen to NBC like you do, and I like love hearing their opinions on NBC. But I feel like it feels like a more natural place to hear them talk about it there.
Yes,
on podcasts rather than like a formal review.
Yeah, and that's fair. I think that's another thing, right? Like when I say that video games need a Roger Ebert, I think reviews are in an okay place, I guess, right? Like I think there's a lot of
they're functioning.
They're functioning, yeah. Like there's a lot that needs to be changed. Like let's just stick with the IGN thing for a second. Like we've talked a lot about, like, oh, you love this particular genre of video game, you're going to review the next video game in a series or the next video game in this genre. Like, I don't necessarily know that that's the best way to go about it because people become like specialized in one particular skill or like one particular genre of video game. And that doesn't give a complete picture of like what that video game's strengths and weaknesses are. But maybe you're catering to just like a specific audience. But you don't see that on Metacritic or OpenCritic. Like if a game is a niche game and there's only say 30 people on OpenCritic reviewing it, but they're all huge fans of like Mech Assault games or whatever. Like that's got an 89 on Metacritic or OpenCritic, but then like you play it and you don't really like mech builder games and you're like, this game is complete trash. Like there's no onboarding. There's no, like if you're not, so I don't know if that's necessarily the best way to go about it. And the other thing that's terrible about the industry right now is just like, you don't know who's reviewing games. Like if you don't know who is reviewing a game, like what their taste is, then you really can't like get an accurate depiction of what score they gave it, So like wrapping that all up into a number and then shipping it off to Metacritic or something. It's just like, if you don't know the reviewer of who reviewed the game and their gaming taste, it's hard to be objective about these things, I think is what I'm saying.
Oh yeah. And then you also have people who are either like don't want the wrath of angry gamers, so they score a game higher than they think they should, or they do want to just be contrarian and like get kind of like the person who gave Tears of the Kingdom a 60, like that sort of
that's trash.
Like, you're
that's
just
like
trying to get people mad at you.
Well, and you're just trying to get attention, right? Like no one's ever heard of this guy except for like the 2 reviews he gave that were like very against the grain. That's just trash. But I mean, I guess the way it's set up right now, like it's kind of set up for that to take place, right? Like review bombs happen with users and everything, which why do I even have user scores anymore?
The Roger Ebert is not any of us, I don't think. So maybe we should just not have that capability.
Exactly.
But nice. This has been fascinating. I learned a ton about Roger Ebert. One final thing as I'm thinking to it as well is like, I love the way you described that he was able to like kind of have these connections the way that Gene Park also does this too, where he can like, he talks about the creators themselves. I'd love to see that more in reviews, but also understand that's hard to keep it objective. And that takes a lot of journalistic willpower, and frankly, skill. Like I've been chipping away at Psych Odyssey, the Psychonauts 2 documentary on YouTube. That's
cool.
It's fascinating. It's great. It like makes me like Psychonauts 2 more, knowing kind of like all the story behind it, and also like even kind of give it a more graceful eye of seeing of just like the little conversations of a team come with a compromise because they can't do everything in time, and like that has made Psychonauts 2 better in my eyes. But also, like, that wouldn't be a good review. Wouldn't be a good way to review it, knowing all that background too.
Right.
So,
and I guess like my final point that I really want to hammer home is like, I think video game criticism is different than reviewing, and I think that video games need like a mainstream critic to just step up and like you have YouTube creators that are really good at this. Like, my favorite is Game Maker's Toolkit. Like that's more of a site for, I think, game critics to probably like study, or I guess game developers as well. I don't know how much they're going to learn about it, but maybe like design principles and stuff. But yeah, like Jeremy Parish does a good job with a lot of his criticisms of like NES games specifically, and like Game Boy and like other kind of really retro stuff. But
Yeah.
I guess it's just like, in my opinion, there are some people who would be good at this that have a platform. They just kind of need to step up and maybe take it. And I don't know if one of these companies would be willing to let that happen, because we do live in an era where algorithms reign, and this is not going to hit like hard for any website,
Yeah.
But I think it could create like a persona, or like, if there is that Roger Ebert, you're going to have like some celebrity status with that, and that will produce its own content.
Yeah. And maybe it's not even like the traditional review with a review score at the end. Maybe there's a different format than that, or it has to start out that like a column instead of a review.
a long form essay, kind of like what he did. So
yeah. Well, Landry, any final thoughts before we wrap up here?
No, man, I think I got it all out.
Good.
Hopefully in a coherent way. Who knows?
Absolutely.
Let us know in the comments what if you could make any sense of any of what I said.
No, that was great. Thank you for preparing all that and sharing all it. And that was a good episode. But before we go, got one name, one game. What are you playing?
I am playing a lot of Balatro, just nonstop all year. I think I've sunk over 100 hours into that bad boy.
It's going to get me eventually. I haven't bought it yet, but I feel like the clock's ticking.
Man.
Meanwhile, I've been playing some Metroid Zero Mission. Well, thank you all for joining me. Landry, where else are you out on the internet?
You can find me on Bitcast. It's a monthly podcast. My friend Jake Martin, the Bit Bloggist, produces it, and I'm on there, and we talk about video games, and it's a lot of fun.
Nice. Well, thank you all for listening in. You can follow us on the major podcasting services. You can find us on the proper socials at Quick Play Pod, and let us know which reviewer do you think is doing it well. Who's a good critic? That's all the time we have for today. Thanks.